Γεια σας μαθητές. Salvete discipuli. Welcome to episode 2 of Medical Greek and Latin. And today we're going to be talking about more Greek prefixes. And if you missed part 1, be sure you go back and watch that before this one. So today we're going to start with the word Hemi. And Hemi might look familiar to you. We do have it in non-medical English words, and it does have a Latin cousin, semi. And this means half or partial or one side. Now, as I've said before, I'm not going to be talking a lot at the moment about root words, and I'm not going to be teaching a lot of medical terms. I'm just focusing on prefixes for a while. But we have seen the word cardia, which many of you know probably is related to the heart. It means heart from the Greek word kardia. So we get the word hemicardia from this. And here's what it looks like in the Greek, imikardia. Even if you don't know what hemicardia is, you now know that it has to do with half or part or one side of the heart. And the Greek is pretty easy to predict from what you know of the English. The H in hemi is represented as that little thing, that little breathing mark we call it. It's called a rough breathing mark actually, right above the eta. Okay, that's the H. Greek actually has no H. Modern Greek has no H. Ancient Greek did. Okay, and that's an important little thing to remember for those of you who are actually learning Greek with these videos. We probably all know the word paralysis. We have a word hemiparalysis, and in Greek, imiparalisi. And for those of you who are learning Greek, don't worry too much about this ending here. You might see that there's an ita there, but an SIS in the English, there's a reason for that. We'll talk about it later. Here's the word plegia, and we get the medical term hemiplegia. And here's what it looks like in Greek, imiplegia. And even if you don't know what the words by themselves mean, you still know that it pertains to, again, something that is half or part or partial or one side. And if you don't know plegia, don't worry because that'll come up along with many of these other words in later lessons. Sphere. I'm going to take us a little bit outside of medical Greek and Latin for a moment. We know what a sphere is, and we probably have all seen the word hemisphere, hemisferio, a half of a sphere. Now we have the word crania or cranion, which means the head or the skull. We also have the word kranos, which means helmet. And in French, we get this grain, this G-R-A-I-N. So a emigraine or a migraine, hemicrania, is the pain felt in half of the head, on one side of the head. So remember, a lot of these words do get modified a little bit as they pass through French, as they pass through British English, but the roots, the prefixes, basically are identifiable by the time they get to American English. Next, we'll look at the word hyper, which means over, above, excessive, above normal. And hyper is a very interesting word. It has many forms that we'll be able to identify. We get super from it, and we get over that is related to it. And believe it or not, we get the word Uber. So the next time you're out there hailing a ride from Uber, I want you to think back to this video and to think a lot about Greek. So What's also interesting about super and hyper and over and uber is that if you go to Greece, you'll see that a lot of supermarkets are actually called supermarket. Now, there's nothing really Greek about the word supermarket. It just sounds cool. But there actually is a Greek word for a supermarket, and that is hyperagora. Agora is a market, and super and hyper, again, these are basically the same word. Okay, so if we have a word like glycemia, you may have heard the word glycemic before. Hyperglycemia, there's what it looks like in Greek, hyperglycemia. Even if you don't know that GLYC or the glyc has something to do with sweets and with sugar, it doesn't matter because we'll learn that later. But the hyper should tell you something is in excess. Then we have hyperlipemia and hypergalactia. Again, if we don't know what these white parts of the words mean, we can always look them up, or we'll learn them in a later video. Well, now we move on to hypo or hype, and the HYP is used when the next letter is an H. And this means under or deficient, below normal, so it's the opposite of what we just learned. This one also has a Latin cousin, sub, like submarine, subdermal, subway, and so on. Well, we have the word derm, which we may or may not know means skin. Could also be leather. So hypodermic. Hypodermiki. So if something is hypodermic, it's below the skin. Hypochondria, a word that has had different meanings over the years. Those of you who've been with me learning Greek for a while might know that chondria comes from the word chondros, which means fat, okay, having something extra on the ribs or something like that, but we're not going to get into the meaning of that here. Hypochondria, look at that, the Greek it just comes to us into the English almost directly, and you'll notice that over the epsilon is that mark again, that rough breathing, which represents the long lost H. Okay, and that mark is called the sia. We talk about that in other videos. And there's hyphidrosis. Now, what if I told you that hidrosis meant sweating? You know that the HYP is something that is low, something that is deficient, and now you know that the hidrosis means sweating. So what would this new word be? Hyperhidrosis. You can pause if you need a second to think about it, but if you've been paying attention and taking good notes, you already know that hyperhidrosis is excessive sweating. Your next word is peri, which you've probably seen before. It means around or surrounding. And we'll get words like periodontist. Well, ist means one who does, and the odont, or the dondi, is the tooth. So the one who works around the tooth is the periodontist, maybe somebody who looks at your gums, for example. Okay, perilaryngitis. If you don't know what the larynx is, don't worry, we'll get to it. Okay, pericystitis. And a periscope, that thing that looks like a bent telescope that was used in old submarines. And even the word perimeter. So peri and meter. We know what peri means. Meter means measurement. And perimeter, as we know, is the measurement around a shape, around a polygon. Interestingly, and it comes from the Greek word perimetros, interestingly, it was also the source of the letter pi, or as we say in Greek, pi, because perimeter was the concept that they used to originally figure out circumference. Okay, so when we talk about the measurement of a circle, the ratio of the circumference and the radius, 22/7, which equals 3.14, that was all figured out originally using polygons, and that's also mentioned in another video on this channel. The next one is a very important one. This is sin or sim, and it means together, with, or joined. Lots of words come from this, and we'll see also the SY if the next letter is an L or an S. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Sim is used before the letters B, P, and M. So we'll get words like synapse. And look at the Greek, synapsi, just matches up perfectly. Synthesis, synthesis. Now, a lot of Greeks don't say synthesis anymore. That ending is part of something called the old third declension, which is not often used in modern Greek. What you'll see these days in Greece is synthesi, but it's the same thing. And syn and thesi have Latin counterparts. Syn becomes come, and thesi becomes posit, where you get words like position. Your thesis is your position in a paper. And you get words like compose, composition, composite. Okay, these are basically the same idea as synthesy, together and put. We're putting something together. We're positing. Composer. And these words are all so important, your SYNs and your thes, your thesi, and your com and your pose, that sometimes they even get mixed. And we'll get something like this, a symposium. Sim is Greek, posium is Latin. Symbiosis, and you can see now because there's a letter M here instead of an N, and that's because it's because the B follows. Sympathy. Pathy means suffering, so you can kind of put together the meaning of that one. Similia. Syllopsis. Okay, and now you can see that we're using an L before the letter L. The SY is constant. And systolic. Now we just have SY. The next letter is an S. So as I said at the end of the last video, and I'll probably say at the end of the subsequent ones, memorize the prefixes from this lesson. Look up any unknown words, lots of medical terms here. I don't think anybody would expect you to know them, but they will come up again. Be ready to add more. See what they look like in Greek, especially if you're somebody who wants to improve your Greek spelling or learn Greek, or if you're somebody who is Greek and wants to know how to use these in English. This is a reversible process. Look for recurring words. So today you saw the word systolic, and you've already learned dia in a previous lesson. So it's very possible that in an upcoming lesson you'll learn diastolic. Really all you need to know is what the stolic is. And start thinking about Latin analogs, Latin words that are related to the Greek ones. So we have sympathy, but we also have compassion, which are remarkably similar words. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Telos!